guys, Brittany here. So for today's video, I wanted to show you how you can turn a refurbished window into a vintage window picture frame. If you're interested in learning how to do so at home, then keep on watching. So here is what the original window looked like. I got it from this amazing salvage shop in Sarasota, Florida. I'll be sure to link them in the description box below. But as you can see, it is quite dirty, really run down, needs a good paint job, and definitely some cleaning work to be done. The first step is going to be to clean off your window. So I just have some dish soap in a bowl and a nice scrubbing brush, and I basically just scrubbed away at all the wood areas, really getting into the nooks and crannies because there was a lot of dirt buildup and the wood was actually stained from it. In addition, I found that a lot of little pieces of wood were chipping off from the wood itself, so scrubbing over these areas definitely helps smooth it all out. So the next step was to start scraping off all of that old paint that was layered and layered on, let me tell you. So I went out and bought this paint scraper at Home Depot in the paint section and started working at it. Okay, but I have to be honest with you guys, this process took forever. I'm talking like 2 hours. What I learned later on is that when the wood was more moistened, I've learned that other people who refurbish windows will use some kind of steamer that makes the paint kind of peel off a lot easier. I didn't have this option, so from me wetting it through the washing is kind of what I had to work with. And the good news is that I wasn't being a perfectionist in this process by any means. I didn't really care that there was still maybe some paint left on in some areas, because at the end of the day, I did want it to have that vintage look. So I merely just wanted to scrape off a majority of the paint to give me a nice smooth finish, and this was really going to be good for when I'm wanting to paint over it later. So here is the finished look after scraping off all of the paint. As you can see, there are still some white spots left over, like I mentioned, but the majority of the wood is clear, and it even has sort of a rustic look itself. So next, it's time to sand off all of the wood to make a nice smooth area before we start painting. I did end up sanding both sides of the window and scraping the paint off both of them, just because, like I said, there were pieces that were cracking off already, so I really just wanted to make it smooth all over so that anytime I moved the piece within my house, there weren't little fracks of paint that were falling off or anything like that. And I did want to mention again that this process was exhausting. I mean, I was outside in 95-degree weather sanding this thing and scraping paint for a good 2.5 hours. I mean, do you see how sweaty my shirt got? It was a workout, let me tell you. But anyways, the next thing I did was taking this old toothbrush I had left over from the dentist. I used this to get all the little sawdust pieces out of all the corners of the window. This process was pretty tedious, and at one point I actually ended up bringing my blow dryer outside with me to help blow dry some of the pieces out of the way too while I scrub with the brush, but this is just something I did because painting over this would be a no-go. But finally, after all that hard work, it was time to paint. And as you can see, I was super excited to get started. So for paint, I chose this chalky finished white acrylic paint. It was around like $6 or $7 at Michael's, and I just used one canister of this for the project. And then as far as brushes goes, I love these ones. They're like $2 at Home Depot, just basic painting brushes. So for the larger areas, I obviously use the bigger brush. I mentioned earlier that I was using acrylic paint, and I had a debate in my head a little bit over this in terms of if I wanted to invest in an actual wood paint and buy, better quality paint that was for a project like this. But I like the acrylic because A, it dries really fast, so I didn't have to wait a long time for my project to dry before I got to move on to the other steps. I also like the acrylic because it didn't go on perfectly smooth onto the wood, which made it look like a little bit of an older paint, something as if it was actually a vintage window, and I just cleaned it up with the paint, making it look a lot nicer and whiter, which I liked how it turned out at the end. By the way, I did end up painting the side panels and top panel of the window. I just didn't get it on camera, so FYI. So moving on, I took a sponge and using the rougher side of it, I started sort of chiseling away at some of the painted areas, some of the areas that were raised. I feel like this gives it sort of a worn-in look and sort of that vintage look I was going for, as I mentioned. Seems kind of counterproductive, but I really like how it turned out in the end. Feel free to approach this however you would like if you do this project on your own at home. And then you'll see that I go back in with this smaller paintbrush just to do some touch-ups, and then eventually fill in all of the inner panels around the glass. As I mentioned before, I was not looking for perfection by any means when it comes to this project. I also mentioned that I wasn't going to break the glass, so the glass is actually going to be our backdrop for our picture frame. And so I actually was preferring to get some of the white paint on the inner edges of the glass, which is going to help me later on when I'm putting in my backdrops, so that there isn't any chance of seeing through the glass or any cracks or anything like that that could potentially be exposed. I'm happy that I chose the color white because white is really trendy right now. That rustic chic look is really in as well. You see it a lot on HGTV. But I'm disappointed because my walls in my apartment are white and I can't paint them. So I'm hoping that for my future home there'll be some more contrast. The next step is going to be measuring out the backgrounds for each of our picture frames. So I went out to Michael's and bought this poster board. It's almost like a thick cardstock material, so I included the information there. And I measured out the length and width of each of the windows, and I'm going to cut these to scale so we can place them into each of our frames. Once I got my measurements, I cut out an individual card and then basically just used that as my stencil when I was creating the rest of the cards themselves. All of the windows are around the same size, although a couple of them fit a little bit looser and a little bit tighter than others, so this is just something that I had to adjust as I went along. I have to laugh here at the fact that I have changed clothes in this video like 3 times now, but as you guys could see, this process did take a while. It was kind of like a Saturday to Sunday project. All the outdoor stuff can be done on one day, and then maybe while you're waiting for your paint to dry, you can go in and do the other indoor stuff the next day. That was what I would recommend. And while I'm finishing the cutting up here, I did want to mention to you guys that all the materials that I used throughout this project is going to be listed in the description box below, so check that out after this video if you want to pursue this yourself. Okay, once those cards are cut out, you are then going to need Mod Podge, which you can get at any craft store. And then you'll also need some kind of paintbrush. It really doesn't matter what kind of paintbrush, just some kind of paintbrush. And then what I did was I went to the craft store and picked out some of my favorite colors of scrapbook paper, which we will be Mod Podging to our cards. So the reason we cut out the cardstock first is because I found in the past that scrapbook paper is really thin, and just using Mod Podge to glue the scrapbook paper onto the glass windows themselves, I have a feeling it was going to create some wrinkles and maybe not look as nice, clean, and crisp. So this cardstock poster board is really there just to provide it some structure, and that way when we're adhering everything on, it's nice and firm and flat and uniform. You'll notice here as well that I take this spatula and I use that just to make sure that everything is nice and flat. No wrinkles, no bumps, no nothing. Once you have all your cards ready, I went ahead and Mod Podge and used a hot glue gun to adhere them to the window. So you can see I'm putting on the Mod Podge here, and I realized that the cardstock kind of had an ability where it started to almost fold over on itself because it was in such small pieces that I decided to get a hot glue gun involved too and just put some pieces of hot glue on either corner so that it kind of held down the corners really nicely before I placed the card down. And again, you'll see me grabbing for my spatula here and just using that to make sure that nothing's wrinkled and everything is nice and firmly pressed onto the window. And here's a close-up of what the windows look like with all the cardstock placed in them. These next 3 materials really make the project come together, so I went out and bought some string from Michael's for like $3 or $4 and some cute tiny clothespins that I'm going to use, and I got my tools out. That's right, you guys, I brought out the power drill. So yes, power tools are needed for this DIY, but hey, who says you can't bring a little bit of handiwork to a project, am I right? And unfortunately, you didn't get to see me using the power drill in action, but I promise you, I did use it all by myself. My boyfriend only helped me once. And here's what I kind of did, you guys. So I basically made little holes and drilled them through each of the dividers around the window, and then a hole on each side of the outside border frame. So then, using an embroidery needle, I threaded the string through each of those holes, and at the end, I drilled a screw, wrapped the string around it, and painted over in white. So as I zoom out, you can see it's fairly unnoticeable. Now this last step is optional, you guys. I went out to the store and bought this cord, and I'm going to use it to hang my picture frame if I would like to hang it on the wall. So as you can see, I just drilled 2 holes into the back of the window frame and then attached the cord to it. And from there, I have a nice sturdy cord that's going to be able to hold up this heavy window. Once that is complete, you guys have your final look. All you have to do next is hang your favorite pictures with your clothespins onto your string, and you have your lovely window picture frame. You can choose photos with friends or family. I decided to go with the black and white theme to really make the scrapbook paper colors pop. Although I would recommend choosing a smaller photo size. These are 5x7s. I wish I had something smaller so I can really see the color behind it, but overall I love how it turned out and had an awesome time doing it. Alright guys, that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you like what you saw in this tutorial, feel free to give it a giant thumbs up, comment in the box below, and share it with your friends and all your favorite social medias. Until next time, have a great one.